Hey guys, welcome back to this channel, The Voice of the Past. In this video, we will unfold the untold story of the Holloway family's cursed portrait, The Eyes That Watch, before continuing. If you are new into this channel, please consider subscribing to this channel. Let's start. The Holloway estate stood at the edge of Blackwood Forest, a mansion older than anyone alive could remember. It was a magnificent yet eerie structure, its Gothic architecture looming over the landscape like a silent guardian of secrets long forgotten. For centuries, the Holloway family had lived and died within its walls, their legacy carved into the stone and wood. Among the many relics and heirlooms that adorned the house, none was as infamous as the Holloway family portrait. It hung in the grand hall, an enormous oil painting framed in black mahogany. The artwork depicted the Holloways of the late 1800s, Lord Theodore Holloway, his wife Eleanor, and their three children, Victor, Madeline, and James. Their expressions were solemn, almost lifeless, yet their eyes seemed alive, following anyone who dared to walk past. Legends whispered that the painting was cursed. Servants spoke in hushed tones about how they felt the gaze of unseen watchers when they roamed the mansion at night. Some claimed to have seen shadows shifting beneath the moonlight, flickers of movement where none should be. For years the rumors remained nothing more than eerie tales. That was until Daniel Holloway, the last surviving heir, returned home after decades of absence. Daniel had always despised the estate. He had left at 18, determined never to return. But fate had other plans. When his father, Charles Holloway, passed away suddenly, Daniel inherited the mansion. With no other family left, he had no choice but to return to the house that had haunted his childhood. He arrived on a rainy evening, his car tires crunching over the gravel driveway as lightning crackled across the sky. The mansion loomed before him, just as foreboding as he remembered. The moment he stepped inside, the scent of old wood and dust greeted him like a long-forgotten memory. "Welcome home," he muttered to himself, though the words felt hollow. His footsteps echoed as he made his way through the dimly lit halls. The house had been maintained by a caretaker, an elderly man named Mr. Lawson, who had served the Holloway family for decades. "Good to see you, Master Daniel," Mr. Lawson greeted him at the entrance. "The house has been waiting for you." Daniel frowned at the strange choice of words but chose to ignore it. He was exhausted from the long drive. He wanted nothing more than to get some rest. But as he climbed the grand staircase, his gaze fell upon the painting. There it was, looming over the grand hall like a silent sentinel. The faces of his ancestors stared back at him, their expressions frozen in time, but it was their eyes that unsettled him. They seemed aware. Daniel shivered and turned away, brushing off the unease. It was just an old painting, nothing more. But as he walked away, he swore he heard a whisper, a voice that came from nowhere. "Welcome home, Daniel." The storm outside raged through the night, thunder rumbling like a distant growl as rain lashed against the windows of Holloway Manor. Daniel lay awake in his childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The air inside the house felt heavier than he remembered, like it was pressing down on him, whispering secrets he couldn't quite hear. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the old wooden floors, every distant rustle of the wind against the walls made his skin crawl. But it wasn't just the noises that kept him awake. It was the painting. Even after all these years, the portrait's presence unsettled him. It had always been a sinister thing, but now, being back in the house after so long, he felt as if the figures in the painting had changed. Their expressions seemed darker, more alive than before. Just his imagination, he told himself. At some point, exhaustion took over, and Daniel drifted into an uneasy sleep. The dream began as a memory. He was a child again, no older than 10, running through the halls of the mansion. The flickering candlelight made long, stretching shadows along the walls. He could hear his mother's voice calling for him. "Daniel, darling, come back inside. It's getting late." But he didn't stop running. He was chasing something. Someone. A girl in a white dress. Her back to him. Her long, dark hair swaying as she disappeared around the corner. "Who are you?" he had called out. The girl never answered. She led him to the grand hall right in front of the painting. Only it was different. The faces were twisted in silent screams. Their mouths were open wide, their eyes hollow, black voids staring into nothingness. Then, the girl turned around. Her face was pale, her eyes dark, and her lips curled into a sorrowful smile. "They're watching." Daniel jolted awake, his breath ragged. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat up, his forehead damp with sweat. A dream. Just a dream. But then he heard it. A sound coming from the grand hall. Soft footsteps. Someone was walking beneath the painting. Daniel's pulse quickened. He forced himself out of bed and grabbed his phone, using the flashlight as he crept down the dark corridor. The house was silent, save for the faint creak of floorboards below. When he reached the grand hall, he froze. The room was empty. But something was different. The painting had changed. It was subtle, but he could see it. The eyes of the Holloway family, Theodore, Eleanor, Victor, Madeline, and James, were now all looking directly at him. Daniel took a shaky step back. The air was heavy, thick with something unnatural. He could feel it in his bones, the sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes crawling over his skin. And then, in the silence, a voice, soft, distant, yet unmistakable, whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." Daniel stood frozen, his breath shallow as the last traces of the whisper faded into the silence of the grand hall. His eyes remained locked onto the portrait, his mind racing. Had the painting really changed? The rational part of him screamed that it was a trick of the dim lighting, the storm outside, or his exhausted mind playing games. But a deeper, more primal instinct warned him. This house is not safe. Summoning every ounce of courage, he stepped closer, gripping his phone's flashlight tighter. He scanned each figure in the portrait: Lord Theodore, Lady Eleanor, Victor, Madeline, and James. Their faces were stern, their dark clothing blending into the oil-painted background, yet their eyes, each one, were fixated on him. Daniel reached out and ran his fingers along the frame. The wood was cool to the touch, worn smooth by time. His pulse quickened as he noticed something else. The eyes in the painting had depth to them, like they weren't just painted on but were hollowed out. His stomach turned. Could there be something inside the wall? A crash shattered the silence. Daniel whirled around, his flashlight swinging toward the sound. A chair in the corner had toppled over, but there was no one there. His breath came fast and uneven. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. Nothing. Just the hum of the storm outside. He turned back to the painting, unease twisting in his gut. He had to know. Something deep inside screamed that this portrait held more than just a family's likeness. His fingers traced along the frame's edges, searching. Click. A panel behind the painting shifted. Daniel jerked his hand back. The sound of scraping wood echoed through the hall as the portrait swung forward, revealing a dark, narrow cavity in the wall. His flashlight's beam struggled to penetrate the space beyond. The air that rushed out was thick, stale, like it hadn't been touched in centuries. A hidden passage. His heart pounded. The rumors about Holloway Manor had always whispered about secret tunnels, passageways built during times of war or to hide illicit activities of the family's past. Daniel hesitated, his instincts battling his curiosity. But then he heard it again. That voice. "Help me." It was faint. Female. His blood turned ice cold. The girl from his dream. The one who had whispered, "They're watching." His hands trembled as he reached forward, pushing the portrait open further. Dust swirled in the air as he stepped inside, the wooden floor beneath him creaking in protest. The passage stretched into the darkness, the stone walls damp and covered in age-old grime. A cold draft brushed against his skin as he advanced cautiously, his flashlight barely illuminating the end of the corridor. The deeper he went, the heavier the air became. A strange pressure settled in his chest, making it harder to breathe. Then he saw it. A door. It was old, rotting at the edges, and slightly ajar. Beyond it, something moved. Daniel swallowed hard. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to turn back, to run. But his feet carried him forward. He pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, lined with dusty shelves, old books, and broken furniture. But at the center stood something that made his stomach churn. A second painting. This one was smaller but more grotesque. It depicted the same Holloway family: Theodore, Eleanor, Victor, Madeline, and James. But their faces were distorted, their mouths open in twisted agony. Their eyes were black pits of darkness, empty voids that seemed to suck in the light. And beneath the painting, chains. Rusting, heavy chains were bolted to the floor, as if something had once been held there. Daniel staggered back, his mind reeling. That's when he felt it. A cold breath against his neck. He turned, his flashlight flickering, and saw her, the girl from his dream. She stood at the entrance of the passage, half hidden in the shadows. Her white dress was tattered, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around her face. But it was her eyes that held him captive, empty, hollow, and filled with sorrow. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Her lips parted, her voice no louder than the wind. "They trapped me here." Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. "Who did?" Her gaze flickered toward the painting. Then the door slammed shut behind him. The room plunged into darkness, and something growled from the shadows. Darkness swallowed the room. Daniel's breath came in short gasps, his flashlight flickering in his trembling grip. The girl, the ghost, was gone. In her place, a thick, suffocating silence pressed down on him. Then a low growl rumbled from the shadows. Daniel's entire body went rigid. The sound wasn't human. It was deep, guttural, like something ancient had just stirred awake. His flashlight flickered again, casting eerie, shifting beams across the room. Something moved. A shadow detached itself from the farthest corner, slithering along the walls like a living thing. It was tall, grotesque, its shape unnatural. Daniel stumbled back, heart hammering against his ribs. His hand brushed against the rusted chains bolted to the floor. They trapped something here. The Holloway family had locked something away behind this hidden passage. The growl grew louder, closer. The stench of decay filled the air. Daniel's instinct screamed at him to run, but before he could move, the thing lunged. A blackened, clawed hand shot out from the darkness, swiping at him with inhuman speed. Daniel threw himself to the side, crashing into the shelves. Dust exploded into the air as books tumbled around him. His flashlight clattered to the floor. Total darkness. Daniel scrambled blindly, his hands slipping against the damp stone. His fingers found the flashlight just as the thing hissed, the sound piercing and unnatural. He clicked the light back on and swung it around. Nothing. The room was empty. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps. Had it disappeared? Or was it hiding? His flashlight beam trembled as he swept it across the space. The shelves, the rotting furniture, the painting. The painting. His stomach twisted. The figures inside had moved again. The Holloway family's expressions were now screaming in terror. Their painted hands were clawing at the edges of the frame as if they were trying to escape. Then, behind him, a whisper. "It's coming." Daniel turned just in time to see the shadow surge toward him, a black mass of twisting limbs and hollow, empty eyes. It screeched, an unholy sound that rattled his skull. He bolted. Heart pounding, he threw himself at the door, fumbling with the rusted handle. The thing was right behind him, its breath hot against his neck. The door wouldn't budge. Desperation clawed at his chest. He braced himself and slammed his shoulder into the wood. Once, twice. On the third try, the door burst open, sending him tumbling into the hidden corridor. He didn't stop. He ran. The passage was endless, his footsteps echoing through the narrow space. The darkness behind him chased him, its presence pressing in, suffocating. Somewhere in the distance he saw light, faint, flickering. The entrance. With every ounce of strength left, Daniel lunged forward and burst through the hidden door behind the painting. He stumbled into the grand hall, slamming into the cold marble floor. His breath came in ragged gasps as he twisted around. The painting swung shut on its own. The hidden passage sealed itself, as if it had never been there. Silence. Daniel lay there, chest rising and falling, his mind racing. What the hell had he just seen? Then, from somewhere deep within the house, a distant knock, slow, rhythmic, like something was trying to get out. The house screamed. The very walls of the Holloway estate trembled, the wooden beams groaning, the floor beneath Daniel's feet cracking, as though something deep within the foundation had awakened. The shadows in the open passage thickened, swirling like living smoke. James Holloway, the ghostly boy, stood between Daniel and the horror emerging from the abyss. The entity's massive form stretched unnaturally, its elongated limbs clawing at the air, its face, a shifting, ever-changing void, tilted toward Daniel. "You are the last one." The words weren't spoken. They were forced into Daniel's mind, his skull splitting with the weight of their meaning. The Holloway curse was bound to him, and now the entity had come to collect. James turned to Daniel, his face unreadable. "It won't stop until it takes one of us." Daniel swallowed hard, his body trembling. "There has to be another way." Boom! A violent gust of wind roared through the manor, knocking paintings from the walls, shattering windows, sending furniture crashing against the marble floor. The house was falling apart. Lawson, the old caretaker, stumbled forward, gripping Daniel's arm. "Master Daniel, listen to me. The only way to end this is to break the cycle." Daniel turned to him, chest heaving. "How?" Lawson's face was pale, his lips cracked with fear. "No Holloway has ever defied the entity. The ritual has always been fulfilled. But if we stop it, if we refuse to feed it, we break the curse." The shadows behind James rippled, twisting in rage. A debt must be paid. The entity's form surged forward, its clawed hand extending, straight toward Daniel. James moved first. He threw himself at the entity, his small hands pressing against its chest. The house shuddered violently, the chandeliers swinging wildly as a blinding white light exploded outward from James's body. Daniel shielded his eyes as a piercing shriek tore through the air. James turned to look at him, his expression calm. "I was never supposed to be the sacrifice." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What?" James smiled, his dark, empty eyes glistening. "It was always supposed to be you." The words hit like a hammer, knocking the breath from Daniel's lungs. A Holloway had to be given every generation. The ritual had been passed down, an unbroken line of sacrifices, until James. But now that Daniel had returned to the house, the entity had shifted its focus. It was always meant to take him. A horrifying realization washed over Daniel like ice. James was trying to save him. Daniel staggered back. "Number, no, we can find another way." The light around James grew brighter, his body flickering between solid and spectral, his form disintegrating into the void. James turned to Daniel one last time. "Live, Daniel?" And then the entity screamed as James pushed forward, forcing himself inside the monster's writhing chest. The shadows convulsed, twisting in unnatural agony. The house trembled violently, the walls cracking apart as the Holloway curse ripped at its very foundation. Then, a final deafening roar, and the entity collapsed inward, imploding into a swirling vortex of darkness. With one final burst of blinding light, the Holloway family's curse shattered. Then, silence. Total, consuming silence. The house stopped shaking. The air felt lighter, no longer suffocating. The shadows had vanished. Daniel's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. It was over. James was gone. The entity was gone. The Holloway curse was broken. The aftermath. Daniel sat in the ruins of the Grand Hall, staring at the spot where James had disappeared. The house, though battered, stood quiet, peaceful. Lawson placed a trembling hand on Daniel's shoulder. "He saved you." Daniel exhaled slowly. "He was never supposed to die in the first place." Lawson nodded. The Holloway family twisted fate, forcing sacrifices that were never meant to happen. A painful lump formed in Daniel's throat. He had never known his Uncle James, but now he would never forget him. Lawson stepped forward, looking at the fallen portrait of the Holloway family. Daniel's breath caught in his chest, because the faces in the painting had changed. Where once they had been twisted in agony, now they were at peace. Their eyes were no longer hollow, no longer watching. For the first time in centuries, the curse was truly gone. Daniel took one last deep breath and turned toward the door. "Burn it," he said. Lawson hesitated. "What?" Daniel's eyes hardened. "This house, the portrait, everything. Burn it to the ground." Lawson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Together, they walked out of Holloway Manor for the last time. As Daniel stepped into the morning sun, he swore he could hear a whisper, a familiar voice, soft and relieved. "Thank you." And then, just like that, the Holloway Manor was silent forever. Daniel lingered at the edge of the clearing, staring at the land where Holloway Manor once stood. It had been 1 year, but sometimes, in his dreams, he could still see it. The towering Gothic estate, the grand halls, the endless corridors filled with whispers and secrets. And the painting. Always the painting. Even though it was gone, its memory still clung to him like an old scar. But scars faded, and so did curses. Daniel took a slow, deep breath, letting the morning air fill his lungs. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the weight of unseen eyes watching him. For the first time, he wasn't afraid. The Holloway family was finally free. James was free. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, stirring the fallen leaves around his feet. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to imagine James, whole, alive, smiling. "Be happy, Daniel." A soft smile tugged at his lips. "I'll try." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Holloway Manor and its ghosts behind forever. 6 months later, Daniel had started over. A new city, a new life, far from the ruins of his family's past. He had moved to a quiet town, taken a simple job in a bookstore, and filled his days with things he had never had time for before. Normal things: cooking, reading, taking long walks. For the first time, he was just Daniel. Not a Holloway heir, not a cursed soul, not the last sacrifice in a cycle of darkness. He had spent so much of his life running from his past, and now he was finally living in the present. But some nights, the past still whispered. Some nights, he still woke in a cold sweat, heart racing, feeling eyes on him, until he reminded himself that they were gone. The painting was gone. The curse was gone. James was gone. Wasn't he? A message from beyond. It happened on an ordinary evening. Daniel had closed the bookstore late, the air crisp as he walked home beneath the glow of streetlights. His apartment was small but cozy, warm tones, books stacked in every corner, a fresh pot of coffee brewing in the kitchen. He had started collecting art, filling the empty walls with something other than memories of Holloway Manor. But that night, as he stepped into his apartment, something felt different. A strange chill crawled down his spine. A presence. He turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat. And then he saw it, sitting on his coffee table, a small, old-fashioned picture frame. His chest tightened. He hadn't put that there. He stepped closer, his fingers trembling as he picked it up. Inside the frame was a photograph, a family photograph, not the old, cursed painting. No, this was different. It was a photo of his parents, himself as a child, and a face he had never seen in a photograph before. James. A real, living James. Not a ghost, not a sacrifice, just a normal boy, smiling, happy. Daniel's vision blurred. His knees felt weak. His family had never taken a picture like this. This photo shouldn't exist. His breath shuddered as he turned it over. There was a note on the back, written in familiar handwriting. "We were always meant to be free. Thank you, Daniel." His hands trembled as he stared at the words. For a long time he just stood there, the weight of it sinking in. Then, for the first time in years, Daniel laughed. A quiet, genuine, relieved laugh. James was free. The past was gone. And he could finally move on. As he set the photograph back down, a warm breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the faintest whisper, "Be happy, Daniel." And this time, he was. The true end. The Holloway curse was over, but not forgotten. James had left behind one last message, not in shadows, not in fear, but in gratitude. Daniel Holloway was the last, and the first to truly be free. And as he stepped into the new life he had built, he no longer carried the weight of the past, no longer haunted, no longer watched, just alive. And for the first time, that was enough. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, hit that like button and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And let me know on which topic you would like to see stories next. And check out these other stories you might enjoy. See you in the next one. Till then, take care and goodbye.